Hello everyone again, welcome back to Bioactive Leopard Gecko Journey. Now, the topic I want to discuss tonight is the ecology that is going on in this terrarium and talk a little bit about the food chain. So, we're going to start off with the soil, yeah? Now, if we think of our everyday lives, we walk on the ground, yeah? And the ground is made up of organisms which basically how am I going to put this now? So the soil is made up of all sorts of microorganisms, bacteria, bugs, which help us as human beings to survive, if you know, that's looking at it quite deeply. And we walk on the ground every day and we take it for granted. We don't actually think of the life that exists within the ground, yeah? So, like the soil and even beyond the soil. And if we just use that theory into this discussion now, when we're talking about the foundation layers of this bioactive terrarium, if the foundation layers are done incorrectly, or I mean, I'm not saying that this is perfect in any way at all, but a lot of research has gone into this, and I can see just through observing and not really doing much work. Okay, there was a lot of work, inputs gone in, setting it all up, but we're only 2 months into this project being active, and I can already see that there's signs of clear activity going on just in the soil. And this soil is the foundation to the whole bioactive terrarium, which is the living quarters for my Mr. Jinx. And just a little update, Mr. Jinx, he is hiding under his slate, just over there. So I can see these little tunnels that have formed, not through plant roots, or they're not man-made either. They're formed from the bugs tunneling in, and I reckon those tunnels have been created by the mealworm beetles, because they do burrow into the ground, and also the calciworms. And I can just see there, oh, there we go, I'll point to it there. Just there, there's a calciworm that's burrowed in, and that will turn into a soldier fly eventually, which will then live and become part of this ecosystem. So there's little tunnels forming, and they also help condition the soil, because they help bacteria to kind of move, microorganisms move around, which make it easier to break down other particles that exist within the soil. So for example, the leaf litter, any sort of bacteria and fungus is fed into the springtails, which are tiny, tiny little bugs that exist in here. The springtail's job is to act as like a cleanup crew. They consume any bacteria, fungi, that sort of thing, which again, through their excrement, goes back into the soil and helps with that rejuvenation of the soil. I'm using big words now, but yeah, going into kind of science talk now, which I just love. Here we have an isopod. There he is, just there. Yesterday I saw a baby isopod as well, and I'm quite pleased that when I set this up 2 months ago, for the custodians, I bought 1 tub of isopods, 1 tub of springtails, and 1 tub of dwarf white tropical woodlice. And I added all those in when I was creating the substrate layers. And I also added some bio revitalizer stuff just to mix in with the soil to help give it a boost. And I haven't actually needed to buy any more. None of the, well, some may probably have died, but I mean, they've reproduced and they've populated, and I can clearly see what is going on here, really. I have added in some, so the mealworms that I buy as food for my gecko, if there's any left over or whatever, they'll pupate and turn into beetles. I've added some of them into the enclosure because they work really well as part of the cleanup crew. And there was one lurking around here a moment ago, but he's gone somewhere else now. But yeah, so if the ecology isn't right, then the whole system, it's going to impact on the whole system, basically. Plants may not last long, and it may ultimately impact on the lizard, and we don't want, we don't want any kind of negative impacts on that, really. So if you are considering, there's a lot of misconceptions with bioactive. There's one, for instance, oh well, if I have bioactive, it'll be too humid. The humidity is, how can I explain? If you have a sterile setup and the humidity goes too high, then there's obviously something being done wrong in terms of the husbandry. And if the humidity is too low, then it may be too dry. The temperatures might even be too high. If the humidity is too high in a sterile setup, it could be that there's a lack of decent substrate. So, humidity is important. And in this setup, during the daytime, the humidity is probably around 40%, which is ideal, really, for a leopard gecko. At nighttime, it could spike up to 70%. It just depends, obviously, on the conditions outside and in the house and so on. But the soil in here is, on the warmer side, it's obviously drier because that is the warm zone and it's designed to be more arid, to mimic their natural environment of Pakistan. And then we have the humid zone, which is obviously more humid, which, is also experienced in their natural habitats, in like this sort of bushy areas of the grasslands and rocky sort of areas that they come from. So the humidity in this enclosure, when I'm watering the plants, for example, the humidity is going to increase. When I'm misting the enclosure to mimic a rainstorm, the humidity is going to increase. And any excess moisture from watering the plants goes into the soil, and any excess goes into the drainage layer at the bottom here. And I can already see some excess moisture developing at the bottom here. So that through the heat sources will evaporate, and it'll also diffuse through the soil, which again helps with that soil process of I can't remember the word to describe the process of soil conditioning, say. um, so that will then also create moisture. It'll evaporate and go into the air, which will contribute to the humidity. But also the plants will absorb some of that moisture, yeah, through diffusion and evaporation and whatnot, and the heat source. So it kind of, balance is the key here, and balance and nature go hand in hand. And when man interferes with that balance too much, then problems arise, or maybe through lack of understanding. So I would say my suggestion would be, if you're going bioactive, you have to be ready to do it. Me, I'm a bit of a nature freak, a bit wild at heart and quirky, and I just love green things. I'm a David Attenborough fan and all this, that, and the other. So a bioactive setup for myself personally was just extremely exciting, and I just love doing a project. So for me personally, it's worked really well. Yeah. Yes, I've had to do research. Yes, I've had to network with other reptile keepers. And yes, I've had to network with groups on social media to get info, and also on the internet, Google Scholar, all sorts of, there's a lot of time gone into researching for this. Researching all the plants and cross-referencing, making sure they're safe for reptiles and whatnot. So, but it is, it's starting to pay off. And I'm just happy that things are surviving in there, really. So yeah. But if you are considering going bioactive, I'd make sure network with other people that have gone bioactive. Do plenty of research. You can never do enough research. There's always something to learn. Go on the internet, talk with people, research academic articles. They're the more reliable articles. People with experience, people who are experienced reptile owners, that have been doing this for a while. It's good to network with them. So, and you've got to feel ready in yourself to be able to just take the leap. And once the setup is right, then it becomes a bliss. Then I find every morning when I wake up and I see this, and when the lights are all on and stuff, it's just amazing just to sort of look at, and just, it's like a moment of kind of like therapy. And then it helps me to kind of focus on my day. Obviously, when I'm at work, I get up really early, and so I miss when the lights do go on. But when I come home from work, sometimes they're still on, and it's just nice. I just spend ages just standing here, just like in a moment of zen, looking at it. So it is extremely rewarding for myself. Sterile setups, they can work good old-fashioned ways. I've kept leopard geckos now for about 20 years on and off, and my first geckos were in sterile setups. I didn't breed them, but they lived a good life in a sterile setup. This is just kind of taking it to a more naturalistic level to try and mimic the natural habitat at a more advanced level. But you do have to be ready to be able to do this. And I would recommend putting your reptile through a quarantine period before transitioning them to a bioactive setup, just to make sure that all their health is in good shape, and that you do some vet checks and parasite checks, all the rest. Because what could potentially happen is if you were to place a gecko that you've bought straight from a pet store or from a breeder or whatever, I wouldn't recommend going bioactive with sick or vulnerable geckos, just because if let's just say that they do have a parasite, then the parasites will spread like wildfire through the enclosure. And you can't really, once an enclosure like this has been done, you can't really undo it, unless you were to take the whole thing apart, which would be just such a shame, really, after all the work that would have gone into it. So for sick and injured geckos, definitely the sterile setups work best. Unless, I mean, if your gecko was to become sick or injured during their time in a bioactive setup, then that's obviously something that needs vet advice. Could be some underlying issue, but hopefully that won't have to happen if you've done your research and you've got your husbandry and basic care needs right, and you've got a bit of an understanding into how the natural ecosystems work. So back to the soil. So in one of my previous videos, the one that I posted last night, I talked about the structure of the soil, what type of substrate that I've used. So tonight I'm talking about the kind of the ecological sort of thing that's going on there in the soil, and how you can just see like the layers. So at the top we have some like leaf litter and some bits of like sticky kind of stuff, some bits of sphagnum moss. So this is like in the humid zone here, and then that will eventually sort of like decompose, and the bugs underneath will sort of break it down, and chin it over, and it nourishes the soil, which then promotes healthy plant growth. So it's just to me it sounds kind of really simple, but to many, or to some, fungus? What's fungus? Oh, do I need to be, worried if a mushroom appears in my enclosure or whatever? Fungus is part of the natural process of the bioactive setup establishing, and the purpose, and having a bit of fungus in there is not going to harm the gecko in any way. And if you've got your cleanup crew right, so if you have some springtails, they will actually consume some of that fungus and the bacteria, and it's just all part of that cycle. So now I'm going to go talk about the food chain a little bit. Now, obviously, at the top of the food chain in this system, we have Mr. Jinx himself, who is a carnivore. Obviously, he eats insects. So he is at the top of the food chain in this bioactive. Then underneath him are I would probably say the superworm beetles. Now, there aren't any in there at the moment, because my first reaction to superworm beetles was after watching a video of a superworm beetle stealing some skin from a leopard gecko whilst it was shedding, and it really stressed the leopard gecko out to the point where it made it scream. And I just didn't like it at all. I thought, it's putting the animal through too much stress. So it completely put me off superworm beetles. However, recently I found a slug by this water dish here, and I just thought, oh, do I need to be worried about that? So I contacted a network that I'm involved with on social media, and some people responded, basically saying, what should I do? Should I leave it in there? Is this normal, or shall I remove it? Some people were like saying best to remove it, and others were like they're okay as long as you know keep them under control so that they don't eat all your plants. And I've spent quite a bit of money on these plants, so I don't want them all to just be destroyed fairly quickly by a couple of slugs. So then I did some research, and just through previous experience, I used to do some gardening work, and from that I learnt about herbs, and so I planted some herbs which give off a strong scent which is harmless to the lizard, but it deters slugs. And also a sort of a light bulb moment came into my head, and I thought, oh, I know that beetles eat slugs, so I wonder if superworm beetles eat slugs. So I did some more research, and I googled, do superworm beetles eat slugs? And lo and behold, yes, they do. So the next part of the plan with this is to buy some superworms, which I'll then introduce into Mr. Jinx's diet, which I'm sure he will love, because he already loves calci worms and mealworms and waxworms. So I think slightly bigger worms, the mealworm, won't do any harm at all. And the superworms will pupate into darkling beetles, the superworm beetles, which act as great cleanup crew members, and they will keep the slug population under control, because the beetles will be able to feast on the slugs. So there is a cruel element to nature, but that's just the way it is. So we have Mr. Jinx at the top of the food chain, then we have the beetles, which eat the smaller bugs and bacteria. We have the hoppers, we can see one there, and we have the crickets, which also feed off some of the organic matter on the ground, as well as some of the plants, the leaves off the plants as well. And so they feed off the plants, and then the plants feed off the nutrients from the soil and the photosynthesis from the light source. The soil feeds off the bacteria and microorganisms which are produced from the leaf litter and sphagnum moss and other bits of stuff that is in the soil. And also the water, obviously, is a big source to the life going on in the enclosure, because it helps keep some humidity level going on in there. Obviously provides water for the lizard, provides water for the insects, and obviously we couldn't survive without water. So so it kind of fascinates me when I kind of look into the ecology of life. So I hope that has helped inform your good selves, my viewers, and I will be doing more videos on this, obviously, in future. And if there's any sort of, feel free to comment. Let's get the conversation going. I'd be interested to hear if any of you have bioactive setups, and feel free to shoot me a comment. I'm also on Instagram now as well, and Twitter. So the links for those I'll have to add into this video. So for now, guys, I'm going to bid you good night, and I shall catch up with you again soon. Bye for now.